My grandfather built his jewelry store with his bare hands in 1974, and when he died, my brother decided it was his to sell. He listed it with a realtor 3 weeks after the funeral, before the will had even been filed with the probate court. What he didn't know was that I'm a forensic accountant and I had already started looking at the numbers. The grief hit me sideways. That's the only way I can describe it. My grandfather, I called him Pop, had always called him Pop since I was small enough to sit on the counter of his shop and watch him loop price tags through the little loops on earring backs, died on a Tuesday in October, quietly in the house he'd lived in for 40 years. I drove 6 hours to get there and still felt like I arrived too late for something I couldn't name. The store was on Maple Street in the same small Ohio town where I grew up. Whitfield Fine Jewelry, nothing fancy about the name. Pop always said the jewelry should do the talking, not the sign. He'd built the display cases himself, solid cherry wood, and the glass still had that particular warp in the bottom left panel that made diamond rings look like they were floating. I'd been in that store 1,000 times. I knew which floorboard creaked near the back hallway. I knew the combination to the safe. Pop had given it to me when I was 17 and told me it was because he trusted me more than anyone else in the family, and he'd said it plainly without cruelty, the way he said most things. He wasn't wrong about what the rest of the family was like. He just never said it that way out loud. My brother is 4 years older than me. He's always had a quality I can only describe as confident wrongness. The absolute, unshakable belief that whatever he's decided is simply what's going to happen. He married a woman who is exactly the same. They're a matched set. When Pop was alive, my brother visited maybe twice a year, always with some project he needed money for, always leaving with a check and a story about how this time the investment was solid. Pop wrote the checks because he loved his grandson. I think he also wrote them to keep the peace, which was its own kind of loss. I handled Pop's actual affairs, not because anyone appointed me, no one thought to appoint anyone, but because Pop asked me to, quietly, over the phone, about 2 years before he died. "I'm getting my paperwork in order," he said, which was his way of saying he knew what was coming and wanted to face it practically. "I'd feel better if you knew where everything was." So I knew where everything was. I knew his accountant. I knew his attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Ms. Hartley, who'd handled his business affairs for 20 years. I knew the will existed, and I knew what was in it because Pop had told me not to give me power over anyone but because he trusted me to see it through. The store was mine. His house went to all three of us, me, my brother, and our younger sister, to be sold and divided. The inventory, the equipment, the business accounts, mine. He'd written a letter to go with the will. I hadn't read it yet when my brother listed the store. I found out from the realtor's sign. I was driving to Pop's house to start going through his things, the ordinary terrible work of dismantling a life, and I turned onto Maple Street and there it was. A red and white yard sign planted right in front of the window display. For sale. Commercial property. Hendricks Realty. I sat in my car with the engine running for a long time. The warp in the glass was still there. The lights inside were off. My brother picked up on the second ring. He sounded busy, a little impatient, the way he always sounds when he's done something he knows I'm going to object to. I asked him what the sign was about. He told me he'd talked to a guy at the bank, his bank, not Pop's, and they'd agreed the smart move was to liquidate the commercial property quickly before the estate got bogged down in probate. He said the market was good right now. He said the store had been losing money for years, which was not true. He said he'd already had 2 interested buyers. He said, and this is the part that made my hands go cold on the steering wheel. He said Pop would have wanted the family to benefit from the asset while it still had value. I asked him if he'd spoken to Ms. Hartley. He said he didn't think that was necessary. I asked him if he'd read the will. There was a pause. He said the will would get sorted out, that's what he'd said, sorted out like it was a minor administrative detail. He said in the meantime he was just being practical. He said I was always too emotional about that store because of how much time I'd spent there as a kid. But sentiment wasn't a financial strategy. Sentiment. My grandfather's hands had built those display cases. I told him to call the realtor and pull the sign. He told me to calm down. I hung up and called Miss Hartley. She already knew. She'd been trying to reach my brother for 4 days. He hadn't returned her calls. She was measured and careful on the phone the way attorneys are when they're quietly furious. And she told me that the store was specifically and unambiguously bequeathed to me in the will, that my brother had no legal authority to list or sell any portion of it, and that if a sale proceeded before the will was properly admitted to probate, we would be dealing with something significantly more serious than a family disagreement. I drove to Maple Street and took photos of the sign. I sent them to Miss Hartley with a timestamp. Then I sat in the parking lot and let myself be angry for exactly 10 minutes because I had learned a long time ago that unlimited anger makes you sloppy, and I could not afford to be sloppy. My brother had made one serious miscalculation. He thought I was sentimental. He forgot that sentiment was the reason I became a forensic accountant. Because the things that matter to you, you protect, and protection is a numbers game. The sign came down 2 days later after Miss Hartley sent a cease and desist letter to both my brother and Hendricks Realty. The realtor dropped the listing immediately and apologized in writing, which I kept. My brother called me that night and told me I had blindsided him, that I was being vindictive, that this was exactly the kind of thing that tore families apart. I let him talk. I had started keeping notes. What I didn't tell him was that I had also started looking at Pop's financials. It started because of the estate inventory. As executor, Ms. Hartley had confirmed I was named executor, which my brother had apparently not bothered to discover before listing the store. I had a legal obligation to account for all assets. I pulled Pop's bank records going back 3 years. Standard procedure. I expected to see a quiet, orderly picture of a small business owner managing retirement. What I found instead was a pattern. Every quarter for the past 4 years, there had been a transfer from Pop's personal savings account to a business account I didn't recognize. Not the store's operating account, which I knew. A different one. The amounts varied. Sometimes $4,000, sometimes $8, once $15,000. But they came regularly, always a week or two before the end of each quarter. The total over 4 years came to just under $90,000. I sat with that number for a long time. The account the money went to was registered to a holding company called Whitfield Property Solutions, LLC. I'd never heard of it. Pop had never mentioned it. I pulled the business registration through the Ohio Secretary of State's database. It's public record. Anyone can look. And found that Whitfield Property Solutions, LLC had been registered 3.5 years ago. The registered agent was my brother. The business address was his house. I called Pop's accountant first. He was a quiet man named Mr. Delaney who'd done Pop's taxes for 15 years. When I read him the account number, there was a long pause. He told me he'd never seen that account in any of Pop's financial disclosures to him. I asked him if Pop had ever mentioned Whitfield Property Solutions. He said no. He said he would have remembered because it had Pop's family name in it. I thanked him and sat very still in my apartment kitchen for about an hour. I didn't want to be wrong about this. Being wrong would mean I'd accuse my brother of something unforgivable. But being right meant that my grandfather, in the last 4 years of his life, had had $90,000 quietly redirected from his savings account, and that the company receiving it bore the family name, and that my brother had never once mentioned any of this. I called my sister. She's younger than me by 3 years and has always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who smooths things over and tries to find the version of events where everyone had good intentions. I didn't want to frighten her, but I needed to know if she knew anything. She didn't. She was quiet for a long moment after I laid out what I'd found, and then she said, very carefully, that our brother had mentioned once, maybe 2 years ago, that he was helping Pop manage some of his assets, that Pop had asked him to. She'd assumed it was about the house or some investments. She hadn't thought much of it. I asked if she'd ever seen any paperwork. She hadn't. I told her I was going to need to dig further and that I might need her help later. She asked me what kind of help. I told her I didn't know yet. She said, "Okay, just tell me when." That was enough for now. I hired an estate litigation attorney. Her name is Miss Okafor, and she came recommended by Miss Hartley as someone who did not back down from complicated cases. She's in her 50s, has an office lined with binders and no decorative objects whatsoever. And when I walked her through what I'd found in the first meeting, she asked me only two questions: how thorough was my documentation and how much was I prepared to spend? I told her I brought 3 years of bank records, the LLC registration, and a log of every conversation I'd had with my brothers since Pop died, with dates and times. She said, "Good, because your brother just opened a door he's going to wish he hadn't." The formal dispute began when my brother filed a motion challenging my appointment as executor. He claimed I had a conflict of interest as the primary beneficiary and that an independent administrator should oversee the estate. His attorney, a man I'll only describe as aggressively confident, sent a letter suggesting that Pop's decision to leave the store to me specifically reflected a long-term pattern of my undue influence over an elderly man. Undue influence. The words landed like a slap. My grandfather had been sharper than any of us until the last few months of his life. He read 3 newspapers. He could tell you the spot price of gold without looking it up. He had opinions about interest rates and expressed them at length. The suggestion that he'd been manipulated by me was not just false, it was an insult to every year of his life. Ms. Okafor filed our response, and then she filed a counterclaim, and then she filed a motion for full financial discovery. She wanted everything: my brother's personal accounts, the Whitfield Property Solutions LLC accounts, any accounts my brother had access to that had received transfers from Pop over the past 5 years. The motion cited my role as executor and my obligation to account for all estate assets. My brother's attorney fought it. He called it a fishing expedition, an attempt to harass his client, a personal vendetta disguised as estate administration. The probate judge, a deliberate, unhurried man who clearly had seen every variety of family dispute imaginable, read both arguments and ruled that given the executor's preliminary findings regarding undisclosed accounts bearing the family name, full financial discovery was not only appropriate but necessary. My brother called me after the ruling. It was the first time I'd heard something new in his voice. It wasn't anger exactly. It was closer to fear dressed up as anger, which sounds different if you know what to listen for. He said I was destroying the family over a store. He said Pop had asked him to help with his finances, and he'd done exactly that. He said the transfers were a loan, that Pop had agreed to invest in the property management business, that there was a paper trail to prove it. He said I had always been jealous of his relationship with Pop, and I was using my position as executor to punish him for something I'd imagined. I asked him to send me the loan agreement. He said he'd have his attorney send it. It came 2 weeks later. I read it 3 times. It was a 1-page document, undated, signed by my grandfather and my brother, describing an investment arrangement in Whitfield Property Solutions, LLC. The signature on my grandfather's line was shaky and inconsistent in a way that his signature had not been in documents from 2 years earlier. I sent copies to Ms. Okafor and to a handwriting analyst she worked with. The handwriting analyst came back within 10 days. She was not willing to say definitively in her preliminary report that the signature was forged, but she noted significant inconsistency with verified samples from the same time period and recommended further analysis. Ms. Okafor said, "That's enough to raise." Meanwhile, the discovery documents arrived, all of them. My brother had fought hard to limit their scope, but the judge had not been sympathetic, and what came in those boxes of financial records was worse than I had let myself expect. Whitfield Property Solutions, LLC, had received the $90,000 from Pop Savings. It had also received, through a mechanism that took me 2 days to fully trace, an additional $62,000 liquidated from a CD account Pop had held at a different bank, an account that required a co-signatory to access, and that co-signatory was my brother, added 3 years ago. Pop had, according to my brother's original story, asked him to be added for convenience. The total was $152,000. The LLC's own records showed that of that money, approximately $40,000 had been used for what could generously be called business expenses: a truck, some equipment, a website. The remaining $112,000 had been dispersed to my brother personally, described in the records as management fees. Management fees. My grandfather's retirement savings described as management fees. I didn't cry about it then. I was too deep in the numbers to cry. The crying came later, at night, when I let myself think about Pop in those last few years, probably not fully understanding what was being moved where, trusting his grandson, trusting the family name on the company. He'd spent his life building something, and someone had decided it was easier to take it than to build their own. The mandatory mediation session happened on a cold morning in February. The conference room was in a building downtown, 12 stories up, with a view of the city that nobody was looking at. My brother and his attorney sat across from me and Ms. Okafor. My brother looked different than I'd seen him in years. The easy confidence was still there in his posture, but it had gone a little rigid, a little effortful. His attorney opened by offering a settlement. He described it as generous. My brother would withdraw his challenge to the executor appointment. In exchange, I would waive any further financial inquiry into the LLC and accept a reduced inheritance from the business accounts. He named a number, about 40% of what the records showed, as a full and final resolution of all claims. He characterized the transfers as a misunderstanding about the nature of a business arrangement, regrettable but not malicious. Ms. Okafor didn't look at me. She looked at my brother. She said, "We are not settling. We are going to trial. We are going to present the full account of what happened to your grandfather's retirement funds, including the inconsistencies in the loan agreement. We are going to ask the court to remove you from any involvement in this estate and to order full restitution. We are also going to ask the court to refer this matter to the county prosecutor because what the discovery documents describe is not a misunderstanding. It's elder financial abuse, and it is a felony in the state of Ohio." My brother's jaw tightened. He looked at me for the first time all morning. "I want to explain myself," he said. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I said nothing. "I thought I was helping," he said. "Pop said he wanted to invest. He said he wanted to keep it in the family. It started that way. It really did." "I believe he thought that," I said. "I believe the first check probably felt like an investment, and then the second one came and it still felt okay. And somewhere in the middle of the third year, it stopped being an investment and became something you didn't want to look at too closely, and so you didn't." He didn't answer. "You listed the store," I said, "before the will was read. Before Ms. Hartley could notify anyone. You were trying to get ahead of the inventory. You knew that once I pulled the estate financials, I would find the accounts, and you wanted the store sold and the proceeds muddied before I could trace anything. That's why it happened in 3 weeks, not because the market was good." The mediator, who had been very quiet, suggested we take a break. We didn't reach a settlement that day. My sister called me that night. She'd been following the process from a distance, checking in occasionally, mostly listening. This time she didn't ask questions, she just said, "I'll be there." I knew what she meant. The trial date was in April. The probate courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and slightly overheated. I sat with Miss Okafor and our assembled binders of documentation. My brother sat at the other table with his attorney. His wife was in the gallery, very still, very composed. My sister came in and sat behind me. I don't think anyone at the other table had expected her. I heard my brother say her name under his breath. One syllable, sharp. A question. She didn't look at him. She folded her hands in her lap and looked straight ahead. The judge came in. Ms. Okafor presented the case methodically. The will, clear and properly executed. Pop's attorney and accountant both testified to his mental acuity in the years the transfers occurred. He had been sharp, engaged, asking detailed questions about his own finances at every meeting. The handwriting analyst testified about the inconsistencies in the loan agreement signature. The forensic audit trail of the $152,000 was entered into evidence, transfer by transfer, disbursement by disbursement, management fee by management fee. My brother's attorney tried to hold the line. He argued that the loan agreement, whatever its shortcomings, represented a legitimate business arrangement. He argued that the handwriting analysis was inconclusive. He argued that my grandfather had been aware of and supportive of his grandson's business ventures and that the transfers reflected his wishes. The judge asked my brother's attorney a single question: Could he produce any evidence that Pop had ever received any return on this investment, any profit, any dividend, any repayment of principal in 4 years? The attorney said the business was still in early stages of development. The judge nodded slowly. Then Ms. Okafor called my sister. My sister walked to the stand with her hands clasped in front of her. She is not a dramatic person. She answers questions directly and without decoration, which made her testimony very clear. She told the court that our brother had told her approximately 18 months ago that he had found a way to make sure Mom and Dad, our parents, are both gone. He'd meant Pop, which told you something about how detached he'd become from the reality of what he was taking, would not have to worry about leaving the store as a burden on the estate, that he'd found an arrangement that worked for everyone. She hadn't questioned it. She trusted him. She said she wished she had asked more. She said she was sitting where she was sitting because the truth was the truth, regardless of who it was inconvenient for. The judge thanked her. He deliberated for 4 days. The ruling came in a letter that Ms. Okafor read to me over the phone in the parking garage below my office building, with the sound of a car alarm going off somewhere in the distance. The challenge to the will was denied. The will was fully valid. The store was mine. The transfer of funds from Pop's accounts to Whitfield Property Solutions, LLC, was found to be inconsistent with any legitimate estate arrangement and potentially fraudulent, with the signature analysis noted as a significant factor. The judge ordered full restitution of all transferred funds plus interest to be returned to the estate before any further distribution. He awarded me my full legal fees, and he referred the complete file, every bank record, every disbursement log, the loan agreement, the handwriting analysis, to the county prosecutor for review. My brother was investigated. The criminal process is slower than the civil one, and it was still ongoing when this story ends for me, which it ends here, with me standing in the store on a Sunday morning in June, the front door propped open, the Ohio summer coming in warm and a little dusty. I had the display cases refinished, not because they needed it, but because they deserved it. The cherry wood is darker now, richer, and the glass in the bottom left panel still has its warp. I kept it. The floating effect on the rings is something you can't manufacture. I found Pop's letter in Ms. Hartley's files, the one he'd written to accompany the will. It wasn't long. He wasn't a long letter writer. He said he was leaving the store to me because I was the only one who understood that a thing built slowly, built honestly, was worth more than anything that came quickly. He said he knew I would take care of it not because I had to, but because I wanted to. He said, "You've always known what's real, kiddo. Don't let anyone tell you different." I'd been a forensic accountant for 9 years. I'd spent those years following money through shell companies and offshore accounts and expense reports padded in ways that people thought were undetectable. I'd always understood the work as technical, precise, a matter of following the trail wherever it went. What I learned from this is that it's also personal. The money is always personal. It represents something someone built, or earned, or was promised. And when someone takes it, they're taking that too. Pop knew who to trust. He'd always known. He'd been trying to tell me for years, in his quiet, non-accusatory way, whenever he talked about the difference between the people in our family who built things and the ones who only wanted what was already built. I locked up the store that evening, my key in my hand, the same key I'd had since I was 17, the one he'd given me because he trusted me. The floorboard near the back hallway creaked when I walked past it, the same as always. The lights went off. The display cases went dark. I stood outside on Maple Street for a moment in the early summer evening, no sign in the window. No "for sale" in red and white, blocking the view of the cases Pop had built. Just the store, the way it was supposed to be, still standing. I keep coming back to something Pop said to me when I was maybe 19, standing in the back of the store while he was sorting through an estate lot someone had brought in. He held up a ring, turned it in the light, set it down. He said, "The piece doesn't lie. You can tell what something's worth by how it was made, not by what someone's asking for it." I didn't know then that he was talking about people too. What happened with my brother wasn't a surprise. Not really, not if I'm honest with myself. The signs were there for years in the way he talked about Pop's store as an asset, in the way he described inheritance before anyone had died, in the way he never once asked what the store meant to Pop, only what it might sell for. I had noticed all of it and filed it away in the part of my brain that didn't want to believe what it was seeing. That's on me. Loving someone in your family sometimes means you extend a generosity of interpretation they haven't earned, and you keep extending it long past the point where the evidence has stopped supporting it. The numbers don't lie either. That's what I do for a living. I follow money through the places people try to hide it, and I have learned that the way a person moves money tells you almost everything about what they actually value. My brother moved my grandfather's retirement savings into a company with the family name on it, and then paid himself management fees from it and called it an investment. He built his own version of the store on top of Pop's foundation and never once acknowledged whose foundation it was. That's not a mistake. That's a choice made repeatedly over 4 years. I don't think he thought of himself as a bad person while he was doing it. That's the part I've had to sit with. I think he told himself a story, that Pop wanted to help him, that the money was circulating within the family, that he would eventually make it work and pay it back and nobody would be worse off. I think he believed that story just enough to keep going. And I think when he listed the store 3 weeks after the funeral, he was trying to outrun the moment when the story stopped holding together. He just didn't know I was already looking. What I've carried from all of this is something I can only describe as a hard-won clarity about what it means to actually take care of something, not manage it, not leverage it, not extract value from it. Take care of it. My grandfather built that store slowly, honestly, with his hands and his time and his reputation. He trusted me with it because he believed I understood that the building of something is the point, not just the having of it. That kind of integrity, knowing what you're holding and treating it accordingly, is not instinctive. It has to be chosen over and over, especially when no one is watching. It takes something else too, something I had to find in myself during those months of paperwork and depositions and long nights tracing account numbers. It takes the willingness to stay with an uncomfortable truth all the way to the end of it, to not settle for the easier version of events, to keep asking the next question even when you already don't like where the answers are going. I won't pretend that was easy, but I knew that if I stopped halfway, I would be doing to Pop's memory exactly what my brother had done to his savings, taking the part that was convenient and leaving the rest. The store is still on Maple Street. The warp in the glass is still there. Some things built with enough care hold their shape for a long time.